It was a quiet morning that didn't feel quiet to Officer Daniel. The city was just waking up, but his nerves had been awake for hours. He had been on night patrol since sunset, and the lack of sleep made his thoughts heavy and short-tempered. The radio chatter filled his car, and he tried to focus, sipping cold coffee that had lost its flavor hours ago. He wanted to finish his shift without problems, but life had other plans. At the intersection of Pine Street and Madison Avenue, he saw a black sedan parked in a restricted area near an old warehouse. It wasn't supposed to be there. No one parked around that spot unless they had a reason, and usually that reason wasn't good. He narrowed his eyes, feeling that small spark of suspicion that had guided his instincts through years on the job. He slowed down his cruiser, rolling to a stop behind the vehicle. The windows were tinted dark, so he couldn't see inside. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, then grabbed his flashlight and stepped out. The air was cool, the kind that carried the faint smell of exhaust and city dust. He approached the car and knocked firmly on the driver's window. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the window rolled down halfway and a woman looked up at him. She wore a plain black jacket and her eyes were calm. Too calm, Daniel thought. That kind of calmness made him uneasy. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," he said. "Can I see your license and registration, please?" The woman didn't flinch. She looked straight at him and said quietly, "Officer, I'm on assignment. I can't share my details, but I have clearance to be here." Her tone wasn't rude, but it wasn't apologetic either. It was professional, steady. But Daniel heard only defiance. He had seen too many people hide behind clever excuses, and something about her words irritated him. "Assignment?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "You can't park in a restricted zone and just say you're on assignment. You need to show identification." The woman took a slow breath. "I understand. Please lower your voice. I'll show you something, but I need you to stay calm." Her calmness only made him more tense. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle," he ordered. She hesitated for a second, then said, "Officer, that's not necessary. I just need a moment. I said step out of the vehicle." He interrupted sharply. The tiredness, the long shift, the frustration of a dozen small things, all mixed into one cloud of emotion that made him act faster than he thought. The woman sighed softly, unlocked the door, and stepped out. She was average height, composed, her posture confident. Daniel stood in front of her, scanning her face. There was something about her presence, strong, quiet, maybe too quiet. "Hands where I can see them," he said. She complied, keeping her hand slightly raised. "Now show me your ID," he said again. "I told you," she replied, keeping her voice level. "I'm on official duty. I can't disclose details in public. If you call your superior, they'll confirm I'm authorized to be here." Daniel frowned. That sounded like a trick. He'd heard people say that kind of thing before, trying to buy time or talk their way out of trouble. His patience was fading. "You expect me to just believe that?" "I expect you to be professional," she said calmly. That word hit him like a slap. Professional. It echoed in his head like an insult. For a moment he saw not a woman standing there, but another person challenging his authority, doubting his control. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he said tightly. She didn't respond, just looked at him with steady eyes that almost felt pitying. That made it worse. He wanted her to look nervous, not confident. He wanted her to act guilty so the situation made sense. "Last warning," he said. "Show me some ID." She nodded slightly and reached slowly into her jacket pocket. "It's right here," she said softly. The movement was slow, but in Daniel's tired, agitated mind it seemed sudden. His instincts screamed danger. Before he thought it through, he reacted, jerking forward, grabbing her wrist. The sudden motion startled both of them. She gasped, and the object she was reaching for, a leather badge case, fell to the ground. Daniel's heart raced as he realized she wasn't resisting, but his body had already moved on instinct. "What are you doing?" she said sharply. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he barked, his adrenaline rising. He couldn't think clearly. He just felt that rush of control and fear tangled together. She tried to explain, her tone firm but not panicked. "Officer, you need to stop. You don't understand." "Enough," he snapped. The crowd nearby, just a few people walking to work, stopped and stared. The woman's composure never fully broke, but her voice grew slightly urgent. "Please, I'm not a threat," she said. "I need you to listen to me. You're making a big mistake." Daniel wasn't listening. His heart was pounding too hard. He was still gripping her wrist, breathing heavily. He felt her pull slightly, trying to free herself. To him, that was resistance. To her, it was just discomfort. "Don't resist," he said, tightening his grip. "I'm not resisting," she said, raising her voice for the first time. "Let go and look at what fell." But he didn't look. He was already too deep in the moment, his judgment clouded by emotion. The next few seconds blurred together. Daniel shoved her back slightly, trying to control the situation. She stumbled, caught herself, and looked at him in disbelief. There was pain in her eyes, not physical yet, but the kind that came from being misunderstood. Then, in a moment that would haunt him later, he acted too fast. He moved forward, his hand still gripping her arm, his body reacting instead of thinking. The tension reached a breaking point. The crowd murmured in shock. The woman didn't cry out. She only stared at him in disbelief, her hand still outstretched toward the ground where her badge case lay open. Everything froze for a second. The city noise faded. The only sound was his own breathing and the distant hum of traffic. Then he saw it, the small leather badge on the ground, shining faintly in the sunlight. His eyes caught the letters, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The sight hit him like cold water. He blinked, unable to process it. His hand loosened automatically. The woman, still calm but shaken, bent down and picked it up slowly. She looked at him, not with anger but with deep disappointment. "Now you understand," she said quietly. "I tried to warn you." Daniel stepped back, his face pale. He wanted to speak, but his mouth felt dry. The words wouldn't come. A few bystanders pulled out their phones, recording. The scene had gone from an ordinary street stop to something far more serious. Another patrol car arrived from down the road, lights flashing. One of the officers jumped out and ran over, eyes widening when he saw the woman. "Agent Lewis?" the new officer said quickly, recognizing her. "Are you okay?" Daniel froze. The name confirmed everything. She was an undercover federal agent. She wasn't some suspicious driver. She was someone working far above his level, someone who had likely seen more danger than he ever would. Agent Lewis nodded stiffly. "I'm fine," she said, but this could have gone very differently. The other officer turned toward Daniel, confusion written all over his face. "What happened?" he asked. Daniel couldn't answer. His throat felt tight. He could only stare at the badge in her hand and the quiet authority she carried. His body trembled, not from fear of her, but from the sudden realization of how wrong he had been. The silence between them was heavy. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows on the street. People had stopped watching, but the few who still lingered whispered quietly. Agent Lewis took a deep breath and said to the other officer, "Let's not make this bigger than it already is. I'll report it through proper channels." Daniel's stomach dropped. Those words meant one thing: this was far from over. She turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "You should learn to listen before you act, officer," she said softly. "That's what keeps people safe." Then she got back into her car, rolled up the window and drove off slowly, leaving him standing there in silence. Daniel stood motionless, his hands trembling slightly. The world felt distant, unreal. He could still hear her calm voice in his head. He looked down at the ground, where a faint mark from her shoe remained, and realized how a few seconds of pride and impatience had changed everything. His radio crackled, asking for a report, but he didn't answer. For the first time in years, he felt not like an officer of the law, but like a man who had just crossed a line he could never uncross. The day felt heavier than usual for Officer Daniel. After the incident that morning, he couldn't get the image out of his mind. The woman's calm eyes, the small badge glinting on the pavement, and the sudden silence that followed. He sat inside his patrol car, staring at the steering wheel, barely able to breathe normally. Everything around him seemed louder: the passing cars, the chatter on the radio, even his own heartbeat. He had made mistakes before on duty, small ones that could be fixed with an apology or a warning. But this wasn't one of them. This time he had crossed a line that couldn't be erased. When his supervisor called him back to the station, he didn't argue. The ride back felt endless. His hands gripped the wheel tightly and his thoughts replayed the moment again and again. He kept wondering how things could have gone differently. What if he had just waited another few seconds, listened a bit longer, or trusted his instincts less and his patience more? At the station, the air was tense. Word had already spread. People didn't talk openly, but their silence said enough. The officers who usually greeted him looked away. No one had to say what they were thinking. It was written on their faces. His supervisor called him into the small office at the back. The blinds were half closed, letting thin stripes of sunlight fall across the desk. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paperwork. "Sit down," the supervisor said quietly. Daniel obeyed. His heart was pounding again. The supervisor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I just got a call from the bureau," he said. "They confirmed the woman you stopped this morning was indeed an FBI agent, Special Agent Lewis. She's part of an ongoing undercover operation." "Do you realize how serious this is?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." His voice came out hoarse. "I don't think you do," the supervisor continued, his tone low but sharp. "There's already a preliminary report being filed. She didn't make a formal complaint yet, but she did notify her department. Internal Affairs and the Bureau are both aware." Daniel's mouth went dry. "Sir, I didn't know who she was. She didn't show her ID right away. I thought, that's the problem," his supervisor cut in. "You thought instead of observed. You reacted instead of assessed." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You've been in this job long enough to know that control isn't about shouting the loudest or moving the fastest. It's about thinking clearly." Daniel looked down, ashamed. After a few seconds of silence, the supervisor sighed. "You're suspended until further notice. Hand in your badge and firearm." The word stung like a punch. His badge had always been his pride. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it was his identity. Handing it over felt like losing a part of himself. He placed it gently on the desk, followed by his weapon, trying to keep his hands from shaking. "You'll be contacted by Internal Affairs for questioning," the supervisor added. "Go home, Daniel. Get some rest. You'll need it." Rest was the last thing he could do. When he got home, the quiet of his small apartment felt suffocating. The ticking of the wall clock echoed through the room. He sat on the couch, staring blankly at the floor, lost in thought. He tried to convince himself that it wasn't all his fault, that he was just doing his job, following protocol, trying to stay safe. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. He had acted out of pride, not fear. He had wanted control, and in trying to prove authority, he had lost it completely. The next morning, the news broke online. The headlines didn't use his name, but everyone at the department knew. "Local officer detains undercover FBI agent during operation." It spread fast. The comments were harsh, some calling him reckless, others saying the system was broken. It was like watching his reputation collapse in real time. His phone buzzed endlessly with messages from colleagues, a few sympathetic, most silent. The only person who called him directly was his friend and fellow officer, Cole. "Man," Cole said, his tone heavy, "I don't even know what to say." "Everyone's talking about it." Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes. "I know. She's not pressing charges yet from what I heard," Cole continued. "But the FBI's not letting this slide either. They're going to look into everything. Your reports, your patrol footage, even your past complaints." Daniel stayed silent. He didn't want to think about what they'd find. "You okay?" Cole asked after a pause. "Not really," Daniel said quietly. "I messed up bad." "Yeah," Cole admitted, not trying to sugarcoat it. "You did. But you've got to face it head on. Don't try to hide. Just tell the truth when they ask." Daniel nodded, though Cole couldn't see him. "Yeah, the truth." For the next 2 days, he barely left his apartment. He didn't sleep much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face again, calm, steady, and disappointed. It wasn't anger that haunted him. It was that quiet disappointment that reminded him how far he had fallen from what he was supposed to be. On the third day, his phone rang again. This time it wasn't a friend. It was Internal Affairs. They scheduled a meeting for the next morning. When he walked into the internal review office, the room felt colder than the weather outside. A panel of 2 officers and a representative from the Bureau sat at the table. To his surprise, Special Agent Lewis was there too, sitting calmly at the end, her expression unreadable. They asked him to describe everything from start to finish. He told the truth, every detail. He admitted he was tired, frustrated, and that he overreacted. He didn't make excuses, though every part of him wanted to. When he finished, the room stayed silent for a moment. Agent Lewis finally spoke. Her voice was calm, just as he remembered. "Officer Daniel," she said, "I appreciate your honesty, but you need to understand something. When we wear these uniforms, whether it's yours or mine, every action we take matters. People trust us to protect, not to intimidate. What happened that morning could have gone very wrong for both of us. Daniel nodded, his eyes fixed on the table. I know, he said quietly. And I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, I don't want to ruin your career. I just want you to learn from it. This job needs people who think before they act. You're not a bad person, officer. You just forgot what control really means. Her words surprised him. He had expected anger, maybe even punishment. But her calm tone carried something different, disappointment mixed with understanding. It hurt more than shouting ever could. The meeting ended with no final decision. He would remain suspended until the investigation closed. As he walked out, he caught a glimpse of Agent Lewis leaving the room. She didn't look back, but her words stayed with him. That evening, Daniel took a walk through his neighborhood. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He passed by people talking, laughing, living their ordinary lives. For the first time in years, he felt like an outsider looking in. He realized how much he had taken his uniform for granted, how much power and responsibility it carried. He stopped near a park bench and sat down, watching a little boy play with his father nearby. The father gently reminded the boy to be careful when he ran too close to the edge of the grass. The boy nodded and smiled. The small moment hit Daniel hard. It reminded him of what his job was supposed to be about, keeping people safe, not making them afraid. The next day, he decided to write a formal apology letter. Not the kind filled with excuses or legal words, but a real one, honest and human. He wrote about how he had lost control, how his emotions had gotten the better of him, and how deeply he regretted his actions. He sent it to the bureau, not expecting a response, but hoping it might show that he understood. Days turned into weeks. The department remained quiet about his case. He used the time to reflect, to attend stress management classes, and to reconnect with his purpose. He even volunteered at a local youth center, helping young people understand the importance of discipline and calm thinking. One evening, as he was leaving the center, he received an envelope in his mailbox. It was from the bureau. Inside was a short note. Officer Daniel, I received your letter. Mistakes can define you or they can teach you. I believe you can still choose which one it will be. A.L. He read the note twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside his wallet. For the first time in weeks, he felt something close to peace. The road ahead would be long, filled with hearings, questions, and judgment. But deep down, he knew that this was his second chance, not given by the system, but by the very person he had wronged. And as he looked at the fading sunlight that evening, he made himself a quiet promise that if he ever wore the badge again, he would never let pride speak louder than reason. Days turned into weeks, and weeks quietly slipped into a month. The city kept moving as if nothing had happened. But for Officer Daniel, everything had changed. His badge was still with the department. His uniform hung untouched in his closet, and his life felt suspended somewhere between guilt and hope. Each morning, he woke up early out of habit, but instead of heading to patrol, he sat by the window with a cup of coffee that often went cold before he finished it. The city outside his apartment looked the same. Buses rumbling, people walking to work, shopkeepers opening their doors, but his place in that world felt uncertain. He hadn't heard anything new about the investigation. The waiting was the hardest part. It gave him too much time to think about that morning, about the look in Agent Lewis's eyes, about what it meant to lose control even for a moment. One afternoon, as he was reading through an old training manual he found in his drawer, his phone buzzed. It was an email from the department. They wanted him to appear for another review session, this time with an external investigator and a representative from the FBI. His stomach tightened. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a strange mix of nervousness and regret. He knew this was another chance to tell his side, maybe the last one before they made a final decision about his career. That night, he barely slept. He went over every word he planned to say, trying to sound calm and honest. But the truth was, no matter how carefully he prepared, nothing could erase what had already happened. When morning came, he put on a plain shirt and jacket, nothing official, nothing that reminded him of the badge he no longer carried. The walk to the department building felt longer than it ever had before. Inside the meeting room, a few familiar faces were waiting, along with two people he didn't recognize. One of them was an older man with a kind but serious expression. The other was, to his surprise, Agent Lewis. She was dressed in professional clothes, her expression calm as always. Seeing her again made his heart race. She looked the same, composed, confident, unreadable. "Officer Daniel," the older man greeted him. "Please, take a seat." He sat down across from them, his palms slightly sweaty. "We've reviewed your case," the man began. "We've seen the body cam footage, statements from witnesses, and the report submitted by Agent Lewis here." He paused, then added, "But before we make any recommendations, we'd like to hear from both of you again, directly." Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." The man turned toward Agent Lewis. "Agent, you can begin." She nodded slightly and spoke in that calm, even tone that Daniel remembered too well. "When I encountered Officer Daniel that morning, I was on an undercover operation. I couldn't reveal my identity openly without risking my assignment. I tried to de-escalate the situation, but the misunderstanding grew quickly. I believe the officer reacted out of stress, not malice. However, his actions showed poor judgment and a lack of control that could have led to something far worse." Daniel swallowed hard. Hearing her describe it like that, not angry, not emotional, just factual, made it hit even deeper. When it was his turn, he cleared his throat and spoke carefully. "I accept full responsibility for what happened. I acted out of frustration and exhaustion, and that's no excuse. I didn't see you as a person trying to do your job. I saw you as a problem I needed to solve quickly. That was my failure." He paused, trying to steady his voice. "Since then, I've been reflecting on everything. My attitude, how I handle pressure, how I talk to people. I've started attending workshops for emotional control and decision-making. I'm trying to change, not just to get my job back, but to be better at it." The room was silent for a moment. Then the older man asked, "Agent Lewis, do you believe he's sincere?" She looked at Daniel for a long time before answering. "Yes," she said finally, "I do. I don't think he's a bad officer. I think he forgot what the badge stands for, and now he's learning again." The older man nodded slowly. "That's good to hear. The department will take both statements into account. We'll make our final recommendation soon." The meeting ended quietly. As people started leaving, Daniel hesitated, unsure if he should say something to her. She was packing up her documents when she noticed him standing there. "You handled that better than last time," she said softly, almost like a faint smile was hiding in her words. "Thank you," he replied, still feeling awkward. "I'm really sorry for everything." "I know sorry doesn't fix it, but," she interrupted gently, "sometimes sorry is the first step. Just make sure it's not the last." He nodded. "I won't forget that." She gave him a short nod and left the room, leaving him standing there with a small flicker of hope he hadn't felt in a while. A few days later, he received the official notice. He wouldn't be fired, not yet. Instead, he was placed on a 6-month probation period. During that time, he would attend mandatory retraining and counseling sessions. His salary would be reduced, and he wouldn't be allowed on active patrol until he passed a final evaluation. It wasn't the outcome he dreamed of, but it was better than losing everything. He had been given a chance, something few people in his position ever got. Over the next few months, Daniel attended every class and seminar he could find. The sessions weren't easy. Sitting in rooms full of other officers talking about mistakes, emotions, and judgment forced him to face things he had avoided for years. He realized how often officers carried invisible pressure. Long hours, constant danger, the fear of failure, and how easily that pressure could twist into something dangerous if not handled right. He started journaling again, something he hadn't done since his academy days. He wrote down everything he felt, the guilt, the lessons, the small moments of clarity. Writing helped him untangle his thoughts. One afternoon after a class, he was surprised to see Agent Lewis waiting outside the community center. She greeted him with a small nod. "I heard you're doing well in the program," she said. He smiled faintly, trying to. "It's not easy, but I guess the hardest lessons are the ones we really need." She seemed to consider that, then said, "You're right." She paused. "You know, when that day happened, I was angry for about 10 minutes. After that, I wasn't angry anymore and just sad. Because I realized how often good people make bad choices when they're under pressure. I've seen it too many times." Daniel looked at her, surprised by her honesty. "You still trust people after seeing all that?" "Yes," she said simply. "If I stopped trusting people, I couldn't do my job." Her words lingered in his mind long after she left. They reminded him that forgiveness wasn't just about saying sorry. It was about rebuilding trust piece by piece. Over the next few weeks, he found himself improving. He was calmer, more aware of his tone, his body language, his reactions. He practiced breathing techniques, took time to listen during tense moments, and tried to remind himself that everyone he met had a story he didn't know. When his 6 months ended, he was called back for one final review. The same older man from before greeted him, this time with a slight smile. "You've made real progress, officer," he said. "You'll be reinstated, but under supervision for the next 3 months. Make sure you keep doing what you've learned." Daniel thanked him sincerely. That evening, as he walked home, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. Not because things were perfect, but because he had a second chance to make them right. He didn't celebrate. He just went home, made a cup of tea, and stood by the window again, watching the city lights. They didn't look the same as before. They looked softer somehow, less like obstacles, more like signs of life. He thought about Agent Lewis again, her patience, her calmness, the way she had handled everything. She had every reason to ruin his career, but she chose understanding instead. That thought filled him with respect, and a quiet determination to prove her right. The next morning, he woke before sunrise and took a walk through the empty streets. The air was cool and still. He stopped near the intersection where it had all happened, the same place where his mistake began. He stood there for a while, breathing in deeply, then whispered to himself, "Never again." He didn't mean never making mistakes. He meant never letting pride, fear, or anger control him again. As the first light of dawn touched the streets, he felt ready, not just to return to duty, but to become the kind of officer he should have been all along. The morning Daniel returned to duty felt different from any other morning in his life. The uniform that once felt like a symbol of pride now carried a quiet weight. He stood in front of the mirror, buttoning his shirt slowly, looking at himself with a mix of hope and fear. He wasn't the same man who had left the station months ago. Something inside him had changed, maybe grown. When he walked into the precinct, the usual chatter stopped for a moment. Some faces turned to look at him, others pretended not to notice. He could feel the tension in the air. Not everyone believed he deserved a second chance, and he couldn't blame them. His supervisor, the same one who had suspended him months earlier, greeted him with a firm nod. "Welcome back," he said. "You'll be working with Officer Cole for the next few weeks. Keep your focus, stay calm, and follow every procedure." "Understood." "Yes, sir," Daniel replied. He joined Cole near the patrol car. Cole gave him a faint smile. "Good to have you back," he said. "It's been quiet without you." "Quiet is good," Daniel said softly. They both laughed a little, not the loud kind of laugh, but the kind that eases tension between old friends. As they drove through the city, Daniel felt the weight of every street, every face, every sound. Everything looked familiar, yet somehow new. He was more aware now, of people crossing the road, of shopkeepers greeting each other, of the small details he used to ignore. He noticed how much humanity there was in the job when he wasn't rushing through it. At one point, they stopped near a small cafe. An elderly man was trying to push his stalled car out of a parking space. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped out and went over to help. The man looked surprised at first, then grateful. "Thank you, officer," the man said, breathing heavily. "Not many stop to help these days." Daniel smiled gently. "Just doing my job." As they pushed the car together, Cole watched from the patrol car with a grin. He could see that Daniel was different, calmer, kinder, more grounded. When Daniel got back in, Cole said, "You know, a few months ago you wouldn't have done that. You would have just told him to call roadside assistance." Daniel nodded quietly. "Maybe I needed to remember what helping really means." That afternoon, they received a call about a minor traffic accident near the West End. Nothing serious, just a fender bender. But when they arrived, two drivers were already shouting at each other in the middle of the road. The situation could have easily turned ugly. Daniel stepped forward slowly, keeping his hands visible, his voice steady. "Let's all take a breath," he said. "No one's hurt, right? That's what matters." One of the drivers, a younger man, was angry and frustrated. "He hit me! Look at my car." Daniel nodded. "I see it. We'll get the details, but let's not shout. Take a step back, breathe for a second." His calm tone worked. The shouting faded. Within minutes, both men were explaining what happened instead of arguing. Cole watched from the side, impressed. Later, as they wrote up the report, Cole said, "That was smooth. You've changed your whole approach." Daniel looked at him and smiled faintly. "I just learned the hard way that control isn't about power. It's about calm." The days slowly began to blend together. Each one was filled with small moments. Helping a lost child find her mother, assisting an old woman cross a busy road, listening to a shop owner talk about stolen goods. None of these moments were dramatic or newsworthy, but they reminded him why he joined the force in the first place. One evening, just as their shift was ending, Cole received a message on the radio. There had been a disturbance at a warehouse on the edge of town. They were asked to check it out. When they arrived, the place looked deserted. The warehouse stood silent, with one side door slightly open. The area was dimly lit, the air thick with dust. "Probably just a false alarm," Cole said, but his tone was cautious. Daniel nodded. "Still, we should look." They stepped inside carefully, flashlights in hand. The inside was quiet except for the sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance. Stacks of boxes lined the walls. Suddenly, a figure appeared near the far corner. Daniel tensed for a second but quickly called out, "Police!" "Show your hands." The figure turned slowly, and to his surprise it was Agent Lewis. For a moment he thought he was imagining it. But it was really her. Same calm expression, same focused eyes. She was dressed in plain clothes, holding a small flashlight. "Agent Lewis," he said, his voice almost disbelieving. She lowered her light slightly and gave a small nod. "Evening, officer. Didn't expect to see you here." Cole looked between them, confused. "You two know each other?" "It's a long story," Daniel said quietly. Lewis smiled faintly. "I'm conducting a follow-up investigation here. There have been reports of illegal shipments coming through this warehouse. I was checking something when I heard movement." Daniel looked around. "We got the same call. Must have been a false alarm, or maybe someone saw you enter." She nodded. "Could be." They all stood there for a moment, the air filled with quiet recognition. Cole excused himself to check the perimeter, leaving the two of them alone for a brief moment. "It's strange seeing you again," Daniel said softly. Lewis looked at him with a calm smile. "Not as strange as seeing you back in uniform." He chuckled. "Yeah, I didn't think I'd ever wear it again." "Well," she said, "you earned your way back. I read the reports about your retraining. You've done good work," Daniel nodded. "I'm trying. That day taught me more than any class ever could." She studied him for a second, then said, "Growth usually hurts, but it's the only way we move forward." He nodded again. "Thank you for giving me that chance. You could have ended my career and you didn't." "I didn't need to," she replied softly. "You were already learning your lesson before anyone could teach it to you." There was a quiet pause, the kind that isn't awkward, just full of unspoken understanding. Before leaving, she handed him a small card. "If you ever need help with community outreach programs, call this number. We run training workshops for law enforcement on communication and stress control. I think you'd be good at that." He took the card, surprised. "You really think I could teach that?" She smiled. "Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who learned the hard way." With that, she left the warehouse, her footsteps fading into the night. Cole came back a minute later. "All clear," he said. "Who was she?" Daniel looked at the card in his hand and smiled slightly. "Someone who taught me what this job really means." That night, as he drove home, the city lights shimmered across his windshield. He thought about how much had changed in such a short time, how one mistake had nearly destroyed him, yet somehow became the reason he found purpose again. He kept the card in his wallet, next to the small note she had written months earlier. Every time he felt doubt or frustration, he would glance at it and remind himself that people could change, if they truly wanted to. Over the following weeks, Daniel began volunteering at the workshops Agent Lewis had mentioned. At first he only observed. Then slowly he began speaking to small groups, young recruits, sometimes even senior officers, about managing stress, about the importance of patience, and about the difference between reacting and responding. He didn't speak like a lecturer. He spoke like someone who had lived it, who knew what it was like to fall and get up again. His honesty drew people in. Some even thanked him after the sessions, saying his story made them think differently about how they handled pressure. For the first time in years, he felt proud again, not because of the badge, but because he was finally doing something meaningful with it. One evening, as he was leaving the training center, he saw Agent Lewis again. She was walking toward her car, and when she saw him, she smiled. "You're getting good at this," she said. He laughed softly. "Still learning. I think that never ends." "Good," she said. "Keep learning. That's how we stay human." They shook hands before parting ways, and as he walked away, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The past couldn't be undone, but it no longer controlled him. The uniform no longer made him who he was, his choices did. And as he walked into the quiet evening, the sound of the city felt softer, more forgiving, almost as if life itself had decided to give him another chance. Days turned into weeks, and weeks quietly became months. The city's rhythm carried on. The sound of sirens in the distance, the echo of traffic, the hum of people going about their lives. For Daniel, life had become slower, calmer, and much more meaningful than before. He had settled into a routine that felt right. Patrol shifts in the morning, community work in the afternoons, and evenings spent at the small training center where he spoke to young recruits. The place wasn't fancy, just a few chairs, a whiteboard, and a handful of eager faces. But to him it felt like purpose. Every time he stood in front of those new officers, he remembered his own early days. The pride, the fear, the constant pressure to look strong, to act tough, to never show doubt. Now he told them the truth. That strength wasn't about shouting louder or acting faster. It was about staying calm when everything around you was falling apart. One afternoon, after a session ended, a young officer named Ben stayed behind. He looked nervous, like he had something he needed to say but wasn't sure how. "Sir," he began softly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," Daniel said, sitting on the edge of the desk. Ben looked down at the floor, fidgeting with his hat. "How do you stop yourself from losing control? I mean, when people insult you, when they resist, when they make you feel like you're the enemy?" Daniel nodded slowly. He knew that feeling well. "You remind yourself why you're there," he said. "You're not there to win. You're there to protect. You're not there to prove you're right. You're there to make sure no one gets hurt, including yourself." Ben looked up, eyes filled with thought. "But what if they push too far?" Daniel smiled gently. "Then you breathe. Walk away if you have to. Anger only wins when you give it power." Ben nodded quietly. Before leaving, he said, "Thanks. I guess I needed to hear that." After he left, Daniel sat alone in the quiet room. He thought about how many times he had failed to follow his own advice before. But those failures had shaped him. They had stripped away the arrogance, the pride, and left behind a person who finally understood what wearing the uniform really meant. Later that week, Daniel was assigned to a joint task operation between the local police and federal investigators. It wasn't unusual. The department often assisted in large-scale security checks. What surprised him was when he saw who was leading the federal side of the operation. Agent Lewis. She was standing near the briefing table, surrounded by folders and screens. When their eyes met, she gave a faint smile. "Looks like we meet again," she said. "Seems like it," Daniel replied with a respectful nod. She briefed the team with her usual calm, professional tone. The operation involved tracking suspicious financial transfers linked to several shell businesses across the city. Nothing flashy, just long, detailed investigative work. But Daniel listened carefully, taking notes. After the meeting, Lewis walked over. "I'm glad you're part of this," she said. "We need officers who stay composed under pressure." Daniel smiled. "I'm honored. I'll do my best." "I know you will," she said, then added with a hint of a grin. "You've already proved you can handle surprises." The operation ran for several weeks. Daniel and his partner were tasked with monitoring certain locations and following up on leads. It wasn't action-packed, mostly observation and interviews, but it required patience and attention to detail. One evening, as they were reviewing data at the station, Lewis stopped by. She had just come from another meeting, tired but composed. "You're doing good work," she said, handing Daniel a file. "Your notes helped us connect two key names." Daniel looked at the file and nodded. "Glad to help." There was a short pause. Then she said softly, "You've come a long way from that day?" He nodded, smiling faintly. "I've had good teachers." She smiled, then turned serious. "You know, not many people can turn a mistake into something positive. Most just run from it. But you didn't. Maybe because I didn't have a choice, he said. Running from it would have meant running from myself. Her expression softened. That's what growth looks like. Over the next few days, Daniel began noticing how the atmosphere around him had changed. His colleagues who once kept their distance now treated him with quiet respect. They didn't see him as the angry officer who lost control anymore. They saw a man who had rebuilt himself piece by piece. Sometimes, when younger officers made mistakes, they would come to him before going to their superiors. They trusted him to listen, not to judge. And he always did. But one night, something unexpected happened that tested everything he had learned. It was a cold evening. Daniel and Cole were wrapping up their patrol when they received a call about a possible domestic disturbance in a quiet residential area. The dispatcher said it wasn't violent, just loud shouting, but they were asked to check it out anyway. When they arrived, they heard the argument from outside and a man's voice, angry and bitter, and a woman crying. Daniel felt that old familiar tension in his chest. But this time he took a deep breath and reminded himself of everything he'd learned. They knocked. After a moment, the man opened the door, clearly upset. His eyes were red, his hands shaking. "What do you want?" he snapped. "Sir, we just want to make sure everyone's safe," Daniel said calmly. "Can we come in for a moment?" "No, you can't," the man said sharply. "This is my house." Behind him, the woman's voice trembled. "It's fine, let them in." Reluctantly, the man stepped aside. Daniel entered slowly, keeping his voice low and steady. "We're not here to arrest anyone. We just want to talk." The man sat down on the couch, still angry but exhausted. The woman stood near the kitchen, wiping tears from her eyes. Daniel gently asked what had happened. The story was simple, a misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. No one was hurt, but emotions were raw. As they talked, the man suddenly broke down, covering his face. "I'm just tired," he said softly. "Everything's falling apart." "I didn't mean to shout." Daniel nodded, understanding more than he could say. "Sometimes we all reach that point," he said. "The best thing you can do is pause before it goes too far." The man nodded, his breathing slowing. Cole quietly took notes, and after a few minutes the tension eased completely. They made sure everything was stable before leaving. Back in the patrol car, Cole looked over. "You handled that perfectly," he said. "A few years ago, I think that would have gone differently." Daniel smiled faintly. "A few years ago, I didn't know how to listen." That night, as he drove home, Daniel thought about how close he had once come to losing everything. His job, his name, his purpose. And yet here he was, using the very lessons from his downfall to help others avoid the same mistakes. He sat in his car for a long while after parking, just staring at the night sky. The streetlights flickered gently, casting warm light on the quiet road. For the first time, he felt something deep inside. Not pride, not relief, but peace. The next day, he received an unexpected message. It was from Agent Lewis. She wanted him to attend a regional police seminar the following week, not as a student, but as a speaker. At first, he thought it was a mistake. But she confirmed it herself later that day. "I've seen how you talk to your trainees," she said. "You have a voice people listen to. Share it," Daniel hesitated. "I'm not good at speeches." "You don't need to be," she replied. "Just be honest. That's what people connect with." He agreed, though his heart raced every time he thought about it. When the day finally came, he stood at the podium in front of dozens of officers from different departments. His palms were sweating and his voice trembled at first, but then he remembered why he was there. He didn't talk about rules or procedures. He talked about mistakes, about fear, ego, and how one moment of anger can destroy everything you've worked for. He spoke about learning to listen, to stay human, and to forgive yourself so you can do better. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Then slowly people began clapping, not out of obligation, but because they felt what he said. Afterward, Agent Lewis came over, smiling proudly. "You did well," she said. He smiled back. "I just told the truth." "That's what makes it powerful," she replied. That evening, as he drove home, he realized that life had finally come full circle. The man who once acted out of anger now spoke about patience. The officer who once lost control now taught others how to stay calm. He wasn't perfect, and he never would be. But he was better, and that was enough. When he got home, he placed his badge on the table and looked at it quietly. For the first time in years, he didn't see it as a symbol of authority. He saw it as a reminder of responsibility. He smiled softly and whispered to himself, "This time I'll carry it right." And for the first time since that terrible day, he truly believed it. Months passed and the seasons began to change. The crisp air of autumn had given way to the chill of early winter. The city seemed slower now, wrapped in gray skies and quiet streets. Daniel sat at his desk in the precinct, a small cup of coffee warming his hands, watching people pass outside through the fogged-up window. Life had settled into something steady, not exciting, but real. He had been doing more training work lately, less patrol. It wasn't because of punishment or demotion anymore. It was by choice. He wanted to teach, to help younger officers see what he hadn't seen when he first wore the badge. The job wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about protecting hearts, other people's and your own. Every morning he arrived before sunrise. The station was always quiet at that hour. The hallways echoed softly with the hum of lights and distant footsteps. Sometimes he'd stop by the bulletin board, where photos of officers doing community service were pinned. His own picture was there now, him speaking to a group of recruits. The sight made him smile a little every time. One afternoon, he got a call from a local community center, asking if he could give a talk about trust between police and citizens. He said yes without hesitation. When the day came, he stood in front of a small crowd, parents, shop owners, teachers, and a few kids who stared up at him with wide eyes. He began with a simple story. His story. Though he left out the harshest details, he spoke about the power of patience, about the danger of assumptions, about how every person you meet carries a story you don't know. A woman in the front row raised her hand and asked, "How do we know which officers we can trust?" Daniel paused for a long moment before answering. "You'll know," he said softly. "Because the ones you can trust will listen before they speak." The room stayed quiet for a while after that. Then someone started clapping. Slowly, others joined. He wasn't seeking praise, but the sound felt like a soft reminder that he was on the right path now. After the talk, an elderly man came up to him. His hair was white, his face lined with years of life and wisdom. He said, "You know, son, I've lived in this city for 50 years. I've seen the good and the bad in everyone, especially in uniforms. What you said today gives me hope again." Daniel smiled, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." When he drove home that evening, the city lights looked softer somehow, glowing like quiet lanterns against the cold night. He rolled down his window, letting the cool air hit his face. He remembered the night everything had gone wrong, the mistakes, the shock, the shame. It was a night that had haunted him for months. But now, when he thought of it, the pain had faded into something else. Understanding. He wasn't proud of what happened. He never would be. But it was part of him now, a lesson carved deep enough to last a lifetime. A few days later, Daniel received an email from Agent Lewis. She invited him to a ceremony downtown, an event honoring law enforcement officers who had shown exceptional improvement and dedication to community reform. He didn't expect it, and when he saw his name on the invitation, he froze for a few seconds, unsure how to feel. At first, he thought of saying no. He didn't like public attention. But then he thought of all the people who had believed in him when they didn't have to. His supervisor, his partner Cole, the young recruits who listened to his words, and of course Agent Lewis herself. So, he said yes. The event was held in a large hall filled with officers, agents, and local leaders. It wasn't fancy, just simple speeches, handshakes, and quiet music in the background. When Daniel's name was called, he stood up slowly and walked to the stage. As he reached the front, he saw Agent Lewis standing there, waiting with a small plaque in her hands. She smiled warmly. "Officer Daniel," she said as she handed it to him, "for showing that accountability and compassion can walk hand in hand, and that growth is the greatest form of courage." The audience clapped politely, but for him the sound was distant. What mattered was the look in her eyes, calm, steady, proud. After the ceremony, she found him by the hallway. "You earned it," she said simply. He shook his head slightly. "I don't know if I deserve it." "You do," she replied. "Because you didn't just fix your mistake and you changed what that mistake meant." He looked down, then smiled. "I couldn't have done it without your forgiveness." She shook her head gently. "You didn't need my forgiveness. You just needed to forgive yourself." Those words stayed with him long after she left that night. In the weeks that followed, Daniel continued his community work. But something new had started growing inside him. A quiet confidence that maybe his story could help more than just his department. So he began writing small reflections in a notebook after every shift. Just thoughts, lessons he'd learned, moments that mattered, people who changed him. He never planned to publish them, but one day a fellow officer read a few pages and said, "You should share this." It could help others, so he did. With the department's help, they turned his reflections into a small booklet, staying human in the uniform. It wasn't fancy or long, just honest words about fear, patience, and redemption. To his surprise, it spread quickly. Training academies began using it as reading material for recruits. Community leaders shared it online. Even officers from other states sent him messages saying it made them rethink how they approached the badge. One evening, after finishing another session with young cadets, Daniel was locking up the room when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Still teaching after hours?" He turned and smiled. "Agent Lewis, didn't expect to see you here." She walked in, hands in her coat pockets. "I was in town for a meeting. Thought I'd stop by." He chuckled. "You always show up when I least expect it." "Well," she said, "I like to make sure my favorite student is still doing the right thing." He laughed softly. "You know, I never thanked you properly for what you did, for standing up for me that day at the hearing." She waved it off. "You didn't need to. You earned your second chance. I just made sure you got it." They stood quietly for a moment. The classroom was empty, the chairs neatly stacked, the whiteboard half erased. The faint hum of the streetlights outside filled the silence. Finally, she said, "You've done more good than you realize. You're changing people's minds, not through authority, but through kindness. That's rare." He looked at her, gratitude soft in his eyes. "You were the first person to see that I could change." "I'll never forget that," she smiled gently. "Then don't. Just keep going." As she walked out, Daniel stood by the window watching her fade into the streetlights outside. He realized then that some people come into your life not to stay, but to push you toward who you're meant to become. Later that night, he sat in his car before heading home. He looked at the plaque on the passenger seat, the one she had handed him. His reflection shimmered faintly in its surface. He thought about all the roads he had taken, the wrong turns, the regrets, the moments of doubt, and how each one, somehow, had led him right here. When he finally drove home, the city was quiet. The streets were empty, the lights glowing like soft reminders of how fragile and beautiful second chances could be. At home, he placed the plaque next to his badge on the table. He poured himself a glass of water, sat by the window, and let his thoughts drift. He didn't need recognition anymore. He didn't crave forgiveness. What he had now was far more valuable: peace, purpose, and the chance to help others see that even after a mistake, there's always a way forward. Before going to bed, he took out his notebook and wrote a final line for the day. "Redemption doesn't erase the past. It teaches you how to carry it with grace." He closed the book, smiled to himself, and turned off the light. The night outside was calm, the kind that makes you believe that everything somehow is exactly where it's supposed to be. And for the first time since that terrible day, Daniel didn't just feel forgiven, he felt free.